So welcome to this afternoon's program. This program is entitled Technology, Business Process Management, and the Law Firm of the Future. The definition or the description for the program today, and I'm going to read it verbatim because each one of the programs in this series of future law will be slightly different than the one before it and the one following it. Law as a profession is rapidly transforming into law as a business, as new technologies place unprecedented pressures on lawyers and firms to adopt not only technology but best practices, and also modern business practices to reduce inefficiency, improve quality, and to better satisfy clients. Firms of the future will compete in a highly mechanized and extremely efficient environment using these advanced business methods. Our speakers will examine recent developments in the use of technology and modern business management processes, discuss ways firms, large and small, are applying modern business management processes to the delivery of legal services and implications for the lawyer of tomorrow. Before I introduce the speakers, I would like to recognize and thank Susan Salkind of our office for her work in pulling these programs together. About 8 months ago or so, Susan developed an interest in the many programs that are happening not only throughout the country but in our own backyard, many of which are taking place in the Silicon Valley around these topics. And there is a lot going on. I don't know if most of us even realize that, but there are a lot of major programs and topics and discussions and innovations happening around this. So we're really excited to invite our coveted leaders here as to show how much we value you in our community, so we can help to give you information that might help you better manage your offices and your practices and your business. Introducing our presenters for today, and I think both of you have spoken on these topics at various other programs on the law, technology, and the future. So I'm going to begin with introducing Natalie Pierce, who happens to be one of our board members and is a shareholder and co-chair of the Robotics, Artificial Intelligence, and Automation Industry Group at the Littler Law Firm. And I'm going to allow her to explain to all of you what that means for that firm. She represents corporations in all types of employment litigation matters in both state and federal courts and agencies. And she's also a member of the firm's Unfair Competition and Trade Secrets Group, Wage and Hour Group, and Business Restructuring Practice Groups. Next, our second speaker is Rob Berry. Rob is a business law attorney and contracts and commercial management expert. His practice focuses on commercial B2B outsourcing transactions for financial services, technology, and manufacturing enterprises. In his practice, he deploys various technologies, systems, processes, and methodologies to mitigate business legal risk. He leads large enterprises in inbound and outbound outsourcing transactions in complex and highly regulated business environments. And he is committed to the principles of offering greater access to affordable legal services. He offers innovative representation models designed to reduce costs, increase availability, and improve the efficiency of the practice of law. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming our two speakers for this afternoon.
Shall we?
Yes.
So hello everyone, this is Rob Berry here. I'm going to start off with the presentation, and I'm sort of taking a 60,000-foot view here, and I really want to try to introduce some principles that I use, and then we'll talk about some specific methods and processes that I employ and that I work with as a way to look at the future of law as an enterprise from two perspectives. One is the practice of law as a business like any other business, and therefore has all of the competitive pressures and all of the other management issues associated with any enterprise. And secondly, at least in my practice, I serve business clients. The majority of my practice is large enterprise that has sort of complex organizations and regulatory frameworks and so forth. But what I'm going to talk about today really is not related to the size of the enterprise. In fact, it applies equally well to an individual undertaking as well as an enterprise undertaking. So with that, let's see if I can get the technology to work here. So as I mentioned, my practice basically is divided sort of two parts, highly related to one another. The first is business-to-business outsourcing transactions, so the contractual aspects of drafting, negotiation, and so forth of these outsourcing transactions, primarily in banking, technology, manufacturing, and construction. And then I have a small private practice where I serve as outside general counsel for small and medium-sized businesses in general business law. But a lot of that involves basically contract law in one form or another. So I want to start by listing some megatrends. There's a lot of ways to draw from this material, but I'm just going to give you this list here. I pulled primarily from a publication by the ABA, which nicely summarized this in the context of solo practice and what's happening there. But I think you'll see that whether you're a small firm that is intended to be the beneficiary of the observations here, or whether you're a large firm, you're dealing with the mega trends here as a competitive response to the transitions that are taking place in legal practice. So, sorry about that. So the first thing is, I went ahead here, but rather than go back, there is a trend to move more work away from large firms that are across the board, across the geographies, and to move more into boutique engagements that are highly specialized to the end user and are more sort of personal relationships like a personal lawyer or law firm. The second thing is that there's a lot of pressure for everybody, of course, to control costs. And legal costs represent, especially in very large enterprises, or if you're a small business, legal costs in the case of litigation or dispute can be a monumental expense compared to your normal operating expense. And so there's a very strong trend to find ways to both offer cost reductions through a number of ways, or to seek cost reductions if you're on the buying side in enterprises engaging outside counsel and so forth. So that's a trend that has many forms. The next thing is that the complexity of engaging outside firms, especially with regard to conflict of interest. When you have a company of 40,000 employees and you have a large firm with 100 attorneys, the conflict of interest issue is becoming a factor in decisions about whether to select certain firms to engage. This is an observation about the lifestyle or qualities of lawyers and what lawyers themselves are choosing to do, and many attorneys are choosing to leave large firms and go into smaller practices just because of the life-work balance issues associated with that. And so that is a trend that you see experienced attorneys now practicing in small firms and having associations, loose or otherwise, with other firms and technology. The next big trend here is that the role of technology in sort of leveling the playing field between large and small firms. That because of the kind of technology that's being introduced now, whether it's practice management or e-discovery or whatever it is, these things, especially in research tools, these things tend to make the disadvantage of a small firm less in relation to the large firm capabilities. And then the last one is the topic of outsourcing across the board. Legal services outsourcing is a term that most of you are probably familiar with, but the idea of outsourcing is very important in my practice in terms that outsourcing in general, in other words, using third parties to deliver products and services, is a growing trend. It's a ubiquitous trend. It involves basically every aspect of operations, and that also applies to legal services. And the increase of the types and varieties of legal services that can be outsourced is another enabler for smaller firms to compete with the large firm footprint. So with those trends in mind, I'm going to just introduce the idea that one of the ways to look at law firms, and the practice of law is as an enterprise, just like any other enterprise. So what is an enterprise? Well, it's not the brand name, it's not the entity, whether you're organized as a partnership or a corporation. It's really an undertaking. It's an undertaking that is carried out by the organization, however large it may be or small, and it has some scope, it has some complication, it has some risk. And with that sort of very general definition in mind, by this definition, your clients, whether they're individuals or whether they're corporate clients, can be viewed as an enterprise. Individual attorneys and law practices are an enterprise. And one way of defining or thinking about the practice of law is in the sense that, the famous saying that we're not in the horse and buggy business, we're in the transportation business. The difference is that you can adapt to changing circumstances if you're in the transportation business, but not if you're making buggy whips. So one way to think about law in terms of a general topic like the future of law is that it is an enterprise serving the needs of another enterprise on some scale. So in that regard, legal services are just another B2B transaction, that you're really looking at the relationship between two enterprises, and you're looking at services and products being offered and then consumed by a buying organization to suit their needs. And obviously it's in the details, the extent to which you serve those needs, anticipate the needs, all that kind of stuff has something to do with your success, your competitive advantages, and all that. So we're, law firms, like any business, are subject to the same law market forces that anybody else is, and therefore competitive advantage is an issue. And one of the issues associated with competitive advantage is assessing both internal and external risks, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then the internal factors, when we start looking at, what are the internal factors related to a specific enterprise, it becomes a very specific analysis. You're really looking at details. But when you're looking at the outward risk, you're looking at megatrends, you're looking at generalized things that apply to many people or everyone. And so what I'm going to spend the rest of my time talking about here is I've just collected what I consider to be sort of an enterprise counseling toolbox. And these are processes and methodologies that either I use directly or my clients use to deal with some of these issues associated with how does this enterprise respond to issues like governance, strategy setting, objective setting, risk management, things like that. So again, simple definition here. Every enterprise is made up of some key elements. I've divided them into these elements here. One of them is governance. Every enterprise has some form of governance. If you're a sole proprietor, you are the governance. If you're in a corporation of 40,000 people, you have a complex system of policies and so forth and so on. In the strategy and vision tells you where we're trying to go and how we plan to get there. And then the undertaking really is, the business process, which I've divided here into sort of 4 stages. There's the planning, execution, monitoring, and adapting. And so when we think about it this way, an entity operates through its people, so there's an organizational dimension to this enterprise. There's a cultural dimension. What do I mean by culture? Culture is sort of how we do things around here. One definition that I really like is culture is the behavior and conduct that is encouraged or tolerated. And so it sort of gives you an idea of leadership aspects and also governance aspects. And there was one more, the maturity. Maturity is a concept that I'm working with a lot now, so-called maturity models, which are assessment tools associated with establishing the stage of growth and development of an organization in some specific way. So you can talk about the maturity of a risk management culture, or you can talk about the maturity of a contracting or outsourcing function, and that's something that I'll introduce a little bit later. The next point that I want to make here is that there's a relationship here between technology, systems, methodology, and process. And I guess my message is that we have, maybe it's because of my gray hair, I don't know, we have a tendency to sort of rush towards technology solutions and sort of the systems solutions. When we start looking at ways to reduce costs. But my point is that without a methodology, you really cannot design an efficient process. And without a process, you're really looking at technology and systems as a solution in search of a problem instead of the other way around. So my point is that we tend to focus on new technologies and automated systems over process and methodology, and I'm sort of arguing today the sort of counter argument to that point of view, that law in many ways more than a lot of other businesses is a people business, and if that's true, then the process and methodologies that you use to engage in your practice really comes first, and the technology and systems that you employ are a secondary consideration. So now I'm going to share what I'm calling because of the theme, I guess, of this seminar, the Counseling Enterprise Toolbox. And as I talk about these, I really mean that they're introspective. They have value introspectively in order for you to think about your own practice model, your own practice techniques and procedures, and the way that you price for your services and all that kind of stuff. But also, especially in a role like mine where you're trying to formulate a contractual relationship between two complex enterprises, the more you know and understand about those enterprises, the more effective you're going to be at drafting and negotiating a deal. And so a lot of these tools are being used by enterprises, and so we'll talk a little bit about what the intersection might be between the practice of law and the management of business. I'm going to talk about sort of 3 or 4 areas. Governance. I'll introduce these Adai's models here. Many of you probably have not heard of that. We'll talk a little bit about strategy and operational performance, a little bit about process change management, enterprise risk management, and then this idea of outsourcing maturity models. And I've sort of selected some methodologies here that I rely on. So the first thing that I want to point out is that when you're serving as counsel to an enterprise, not all enterprises are at the same stage of development. And where they are in their growth process has a huge impact on the kind of services, the kind of orientation, the kind of issues that they're going to have. And so this gentleman here, this is a rather old source, but it's still very useful. I still refer to it quite a bit. Ichak Adai's, he did a book called Corporate Life Cycles, and this is his way of sort of graphing the progression of companies as they start from an idea and they grow through the period of sort of becoming big and successful, and what kind of problems and pathologies do they develop along the way. Typically, a lot of those problems are governance problems. And so this is a good model to sort of use to figure out whether you're matching your offering to where the enterprise is. The second contribution that he made here is in governance, and it really talks about this balance between ownership power, decision-making authority, and management influence, and how these powers, if you will, or factors need to be balanced in a governance system. The next one here is, many of you have heard of this. In fact, this one is so old that nobody really knows where it came from. But it's extremely useful to try to get a client to go through. I don't know why this is advancing on its own. I apologize for that. To get a client to go through what is their strategy, why have they selected that, what are their internal risks in terms of strengths and weaknesses that they're concerned about and that they're addressing, oftentimes through an outsourcing agreement, and what are the external opportunities and threats that come from an environment that everyone is dealing with, and what accommodations do you need to make in striking the deal based on those kind of environmental factors. The next is something that came out of Harvard Business School. Kaplan, you may have heard, who developed balanced scorecards. And essentially this has to do with establishing and monitoring strategy and vision. And the idea is that a strategy and vision, a vision tells you where you want to go, a strategy tells you how you plan to get there, and it answers these sort of fundamental economic questions. And balanced scorecards is a way of breaking these things down and sort of monitoring and measuring performance across multiple dimensions. And when you start thinking about your own practice, there is a financial, dimension to your practice. There is an internal business process that is unique to your particular practice, and the same is true. I apologize, this thing's running itself here. Other dimensions here that you measure in the balanced scorecard methodology is basically one in which you establish objectives in these key areas. Financial performance is one example, and sort of have a systematic way of seeing whether your strategy is in fact producing the results that you expect. I'm going to talk very briefly about enterprise risk management as another one of these methodologies, but I want to just highlight here, this is a paper that was done by Harvard Business School that looked at the Bank of Tokyo Mitsubishi, that took enterprise risk management and mapped it with balanced scorecards and used it as a methodology to sort of manage the high-level objectives of the bank. And let me skip by that for now. Most of us have heard of Lean Six Sigma. This is your 5-second introduction to Lean Six Sigma. The fundamental concept here is that it's a data-driven change management methodology, and that you don't know what changes you make are going to be successful unless you have some way of defining what success is, and the best way to do that is statistics. It really came out of, it's a combination of two disciplines. One of them is apparently I'm not talking fast enough. One of them is the lean manufacturing, which is essentially a process of trying to eliminate waste, and Six Sigma is basically a way of reducing defects using statistics. This is made famous by Japanese manufacturing, which is one of the ways that they became so dominant in manufacturing, but it's been brought to U.S. manufacturing, and now it's being used in banks and other enterprises as a way of looking at change management and business process management. I'm just curious, how many people here have heard of the COSO Cube or COSO Enterprise Risk Management Framework? That's kind of what I figured. So this is one sort of anecdote here. The American Bar Association, in their last year, they did hot issues for general counsel. And one of I think it was the very first thing they talked about is the increasing demand on general counsel to be involved in enterprise risk management, because regulators are imposing greater and greater responsibility on boards with regard to what policies and practices are being established in an enterprise, most famously banks, to ensure that they're safe and sound and that their practices and they have internal controls and so forth. And the COSO Cube, or the COSO frameworks, is sort of the universally adopted model that banks have adopted for addressing enterprise risk management. And I've sort of, it divides risk management into three dimensions: the categories of risk, the organizational dimension, and the management processes themselves. And then you have the idea of a risk culture imposed on that, and then you have the concept of maturity imposed on that. And so for those of you that are unfamiliar, this is the COSO Cube that sort of lays out what are the categories of risk that we look at: strategy, operation, reporting, compliance, and so forth and so on. And the last one I'm going to talk about here is the idea of an outsourcing maturity model. Many large organizations have sort of quasi-legal or paralegal or professional organizations that are focused on routine transactions based on sort of a lawyer-drafted set of templates to engage third parties and so forth. And the question is, when you're dealing with a very large corporation that spends maybe hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe $1 billion on outsourced services, whether they are legal services or whether they are other services, the maturity of that organization is important. In other words, not every group of 25 people are going to function at the same level of efficiency and effectiveness. And so this is a model that says, basically, it's sort of based on the COSO Cube. It says across your entire organization, these are the steps that you need to go through in order to outsource successfully. And these are the ways to assess maturity of that process. And then you can start to look at aspirational goals for the culture, according to some maturity level. And I bring all this up not because I think this is particularly interesting to you, but the concept here of multi-dimensional process and methodology, and the idea of maturity, meaning that you start out at a point and you set goals to improve your effectiveness and so forth, your growth and development in that organization, is the concept that I'm trying to get across here. And I think this is my last slide here, but in enterprise to enterprise engagements, you're really talking about an enterprise that has all that stuff that I've been talking about, trying to engage with another enterprise that has their own stuff, and you're really trying to select them, who is the right partner to hook up with, how do I establish the contractual basis that's going to govern that relationship, and how do I handle the post-award administration step. So a week ago we had an event where we presented this material, and we presented 2 contract maturity models. And so I'm just sharing these with you here. These are 2 steps. The top one is focused mostly on the sourcing, and the bottom is focused on really this capability maturity of the organization. And if you connect all this together and you say, what is the idealized, mature, integrated enterprise that uses these kinds of tools and methodologies as part of their business process, it starts looking like this. You have a systematic and data-driven approach to governance, to strategy setting, to change management, to monitoring and performance measurement. And then you have this outsourcing function, which has all of the issues associated with enterprise management by engaging a second enterprise and trying to incorporate those 2 businesses. So I guess what I'm trying to leave you with here is that everything that I said would be things that I would need to be aware of to be effective as I go into an organization and start talking to them about they want to outsource their payroll services. What do I need to know as an attorney about that goal in order to really develop a business deal with all of the transactional elements, allocation of risk, and all of those other things, indemnities and so forth, to the extent that enterprise is using any or all of these tools, it's helpful for me as an attorney to be able to understand that language, to be able to understand the process they've employed, and so forth. So, and I guess the last thing before I close here is that everything that I said applies equally well to the law firm as an enterprise. That these techniques and methodologies apply directly to you as an attorney, as a partner, as a founder of a law firm that is trying to pursue some particular vision in your practice of law. And to the extent that you understand these things about your own strategy, then you can look at technology and look at systems and select those things from the marketplace that most adequately and efficiently suit your needs. So I didn't come here to talk to you about the latest whiz-bang. I really came to talk about here is a set of principles that sort of overlay the entire thought process with regard to what is the future of law, what are the trends that are affecting us, and how might we approach that problem from a way that is specifically designed around what we want to do. So with that, so we switch chairs here,
maybe
or do you want me
that.
to slide?
That's probably a good idea. All right, well, I guess I am here to talk about the new whiz-bang. I think that and if there's one line to sort of sum up what I want to talk about next, is that we live in a global on-demand economy, and I think that law firms who don't embrace that notion might struggle in the future. And I think that there is a good coupling that goes on with the thinking and the methodologies, but also looking at some of the trends. Legal spending is way down. We know that. And so we have to find ways to do it more efficiently for less money, on demand, 24/7. And so I'm going to talk about some of those things. So the agenda is overly ambitious. That is it. I'm going to quickly go through some of these. And there's really the reason that I created the presentation as lengthy as it is because I think that for some of you, if you're at a smaller law firm, some issues may interest you more. If you're newer in your profession, some issues may interest you more. If you're at a large law firm, it is what we at Littler, we are a large law firm. We have over 1,000 attorneys. Dedicated exclusively to the area of labor and employment law. And so I think that offers us some advantages in being the world's largest boutique. But let me just take us backwards before we step forward. So 1994, right? By the end of 1994, just 20 years ago, 30 million internet users. Google did not exist. This was a time that communication was still happening by phone and by fax. There wasn't this idea of going paperless didn't exist, right? Now, how many of you know about this last bullet point and what I'm referring to? So, okay, good. So some of the older millennials, right, those who were born in the early 80s, by the time that they hit 5th grade, 6th grade, they were learning on DOS systems. You'd stick your floppy in, and the Oregon Trail was you had to enter commands, enter DOS commands, and then it would take you, on a path along the Oregon Trail. And anyways, what I'm saying is millennials were starting to learn using computers in the classroom, and that's major because what we need to think about is that the future clients are going to be millennials, and they have grown up. Forget about those who were the newer millennials. Have absolutely grown up with this technology and see no reason why it shouldn't be fully embraced by our industry. So then let's go back 10 years. Now we have 1 billion internet users. Firefox just gets released. Google is now a verb. Facebook went live. There were no iPhones or apps. Can you even believe that? 10 years ago, we didn't have iPhones or apps. And a flash drive could hold 8 megabytes. Wow. So let's look at things today. So by the end of 2014, 3.1 billion internet users, 1.3 billion Facebookers, the smartphone wars, right? The battles over the patents, everything touchscreen capability. Now flash drives can hold 1 terabyte. It's amazing. The FCC now has jurisdiction over the internet, right? It's not just radio and television anymore. And so these issues of what Comcast did to try and slow down Netflix because it thought, well, Netflix, they're using way too much of the broadband. And the younger millennials cannot remember life without the internet. You see 2 3-year-old who might open a magazine and they want to take a better look at something and try to do this to enlarge the photo. It's just that much. So let's look at the end of these. This is just sales of iPhones the last quarter of last year. So 40 million, that means the sale of over 34,000 iPhone 6Ss every hour, 24 hours a day during the quarter, okay? Wow. Then what about Q1 2015? So just more than double that, right? Over 74 million iPhones sold. So this picture is take all the data that's been created over the history of time, and 90% of it has been created in the last 2 years. 90% of all the data that is out there in the world. And this matters. This matters why? Well, we'll look. Okay, so this is what will be created this year. Do you know what 3.5 zettabytes is besides all those numbers? Here's one way to think of it. Think of all the words spoken by mankind since the beginning of time and multiply it by 200. That's what 3.5 zettabytes is. And that's what we're doing just this year alone. So, what else is happening? Everything is mobile. In our industry, we're using desktops, laptops, smartphones, virtual access. The one thing to think about, and this matters with the millennials, is that this generation doesn't understand why we have to be, I am certainly not a millennial, but why be tethered to an office or a desk? Why not let us do the work? We will get it done when we want to get it done, where we can get it done. There's more people who do look to the smaller practices or solo practices to have that greater flexibility, and technology certainly allows you to do that. And so I think that as an industry we need to bear that in mind, and things like cloud services and our little MiFis, right, are going to give attorneys the ability to do that. So with that obviously comes risks, because we have a duty to protect what is out there. And so when we talk about these new technologies, I think that a law firm could very well put itself at risk if it does not have the right technologies in place to protect the data. So basic things like having password protections, using mobile encryption software. As far as we have our own FTP, Littler, because of document production. I pulled up this statistic, I couldn't believe it, but today the average case, this is the average case. In the average case, the equivalent of over 48 million pages of documents are preserved. 13 million pages of documents are collected, and over 645,000 pages of documents are reviewed. Okay? So, that's the average case in 2015. Does it make sense? These paper productions, right, don't make sense. But even sending the information on a disk, on a flash drive, etc., there's a lot of concerns, and not only the inefficiency of it, but concerns that something could happen in the way of delivering this very sensitive material. So we will actually use transfers, just send a link to opposing counsel and everything is protected, etc., and I think does more to protect the technology. So you see more firms using that. Also critical, if you are letting attorneys use their own devices, which we don't recommend, and we think it's way better if attorneys are going to be doing any legal work on a device, that it be a device that was provided by the firm. and that every disclosure was made about the privacy implications, that it's not to be expected. If you are going to have BYOD, then you have to have very solid BYOD policies. That will even go so far as, and I think must, allow the remote wiping of the device. Now, also, you'll want to have the ability to review the device. So if the decision is let the work be done on the device, even if it's legal work, and then a lot of firms might have the question, well, if I can get into the device, fine, the attorney has consented, I can get into the device and it's got the client information, how far can I go? Can I look at what's in the gallery? Can I look at what have been the browse searches? And for both of those, I would say, and I don't think so. So that's what is meant by Fourth Amendment in the private sector. Think about the reasonableness of it. What is the need of it? Much better to just not have BYOD practices. So, what else is happening to our legal industry? How many of you, you're just starting a new research? There's not so many associates in the room, but I will tell you that I think that a lot of associates today will begin their legal research by seeing what is out there in the world. Now, Littler, we actually developed our own Google search. So it's called Smart Search, and you just enter whatever you just as you would with Google. What are you looking for? And it's absolutely amazing because you're going to get a lot of hits, and you can narrow it by jurisdiction, by judge, by client, by subject matter experts, and it actually pulls up the results in the way of relevance, who's done the most work in this area. So to give a start, not only that, but then it will, on the side of the search, shepherdize all the cases that are cited so that you can actually click on any link and give that case a read. So, but having said that, Google is out there, and Google Scholar, and so much, if say, for example, you're asked, well, what are the penalties for keeping minors working past curfew, or is that something that can be done? And you just enter that in Google, and the first thing you're going to get is like a DLSE handbook that is squarely addressed that issue, right? So there's a lot of that, and then the free quote in quotes is because obviously there's so many subscriptions now, and we're actually partnering with Fastcase because it is all about that big data that's out there, and we ought to be able to use better analytics. We should be able to predict with pretty decent certainty what is going to be the outcome of that case for risk analysis, to figure out, does it make sense to get rid of this case sooner rather than later? So all of these tools, they are out there and very effective. So this, I think we're all aware, most everyone has, there's good new calendaring systems out there, I guess was the point of that one. And then also the same thing with DMSs. There are, I think that to the extent your firm, and I know the bigger firms are doing this, and I'm trying to sort of speak to a wider audience, but just how efficient it can be to link your Outlook to your DMS and just be able to really manage everything. Also, looking at things like WordRake. You guys used WordRake? It helps. Oh, WordRake? Okay, so you have to try it because it really keeps you honest. Lawyers are still bad about not speaking English, and so we use a lot more words than we need to, and we're maybe trying to sound like what we read in our law school books, etc. So word rake sort of, it rakes through your brief and is like, come on, really? You know, do you really need to say these 5 extra words? Isn't this what you're trying to say? And so it helps your writing to be a bit more crisp, and frankly, I think it's a little bit of a teaching tool. So takes away the passivity of some of the ways that lawyers write, and actually it's helpful to the extent that you've gone over your page limit. You'd be amazed at how many unnecessary words you might be using. So that's what WordRake is. And then, so what about Excel? It is still the most commonly used program, and it's surprising, right? Because there are better alternatives out there, and some free, so for your spreadsheet. So just looking in, and the reason why Excel is so commonly used is because people have learned to use it, and now that they've learned to use it, they're continuing to use it. But I think that's going to change with millennials.
Still use WordPerfect.
Yes, good point. A very good point. So that's a good point. And then Adobe Acrobat. I mean, there are other programs that have OCR, the optical character recognition, but it's still well used, and the bookmarks are helpful. Litigation support tools that are out there. We have. I mean, I'll just show you what we've done, because that'll be helpful. This is when you go to our intranet page. This is what you're basically going to see, and you customize it for what you need. But I talked about the smart search. Do you see? That's our Google-like search. We also have access to all the finances in the firm. So if you want to see who's paying when, or which of your partners are bringing in which kind of dollars, or working what sort of hours, etc. It's very the firm decided to be very transparent about everything that was going on financially in the firm, and I think that's a good thing. So that's what Financial Center is. And then we have various links to, we have a multiple practice groups, so you can click on any practice group and sort of have some best practices examples, and those are constantly being looked at and updated. We have a knowledge management group. I'll talk about that a little bit. So that's just what we do, is you just have your apps right there so that attorneys can get to what they need quickly. And then the trial tools, I think it's really critical. A juror today, they expect to be entertained. And if you do not entertain them, you're going to lose their interest, and you could possibly lose the case. So how critical it is to work with programs like Trial Director, Case Map, Case Smart. Okay, so now I want to leave, I know I'm rushing a bit, but I want to leave plenty of time for questions as well. So I will talk about some of our resources. What we basically realized is that clients do want greater transparency into their matters, into how they're being handled. They also need to answer when the CFO says, what are the risks? What's happening? What are the trends? And so what we've done over the last, several years at this point, is we have created systems that just enable the client, and these are all customized, to have a dashboard that will show you exactly what's going on with your matters. So if you're seeing that this particular manager is having a lot of these particular charges, or you're seeing that you're getting a pattern of gender discrimination cases in this area of the country. And what we've realized is that by handling, so for instance, for Walmart, we'll handle all of their charges in the U.S., and we realize that in mainly Fortune 500s, though we're starting to work with other organizations as well, to be able to tell that company, we will do this for a flat fee. So there's budgeting, helps with budgeting. And that flat fee, by the way, is usually at least 25% less than it would have otherwise cost to handle the charge. And our profitability is increased by 25%, just because it takes out a lot of the inefficiencies. And so I'll walk you through a little bit of that. And GPS, Littler GPS is, we had a lot of clients who were saying, how can we possibly keep up? There's legal changes every day, new paid leave ordinance, for example. How do we know? And so Littler GPS, it's a subscription, and basically you open Littler GPS, and it'll show you what is the latest change in the law, where it's happening, and then it'll give you a link to the legislation so you can see exactly what the change was, or the text of the bill if you're interested in that. There will also be a link to Littler's summary, how we've summarized it. So making everything there and available, and then if, for instance, someone says, hey, what about creating a new policy for our meal and rest breaks, something like that. You can click on the different states, and then it will generate a chart of where you can do what. So again, sort of 24/7 on-demand current information. All right, so yeah, a little bit more about LitlerK Smart, because I think that this is a trend in which our legal industry is heading, and I think that it can be applied to many different practices of law. So looking at process and talent and technology and re-engineering everything, just considering how things have been done in the past, how we can do it differently. That is what led us to build LittlerK Smart. Like I said, it's a configured client dashboard. We use it's fuzzy on purpose because it's sort of how we reversed engineer and then re-engineered the process. But what we do is we can show the real-time intake of data. The client can see everything that the Littler attorneys are seeing. And when I say Littler attorneys, we also realized that there is a need to give greater flexibility to a lot of these attorneys, especially the attorneys that are coming up in our industry. And so we have a large team of FlexTime attorneys, and what they do is they're dedicated to the client. So they will do their work from anywhere they want, pretty much anytime they want to do it, and they're sharing the information with the in-house counsel, so they're really getting to know this particular client, and it builds greater efficiencies. And what we're finding is that there are a lot of very experienced attorneys out there who would just like to have that kind of flexibility, and so it's working well all around. We allow, like I said, the clients to access the materials, have daily updates of what's happening, detailed analytics. I'll show you some more examples like I talked about of exactly where things are happening, what types of charges, where in the country, getting on top of growing issues before they escalate, showing how many active charges are, how many have settled, what is the percentage, what are the settlement amounts. So imagine in-house counsel being able to just give all that information whenever they're asked. I think it helps in-house counsel look good. CFO says, hey, can you tell me what's our next quarter looking like? They're going to be able to give that answer within 10 minutes. So that is LittlerK Smart, and this is sort of a closer look at how you can filter the information any way you need it. And so it's good because business units sometimes have, it's not just what's happening with the company in general, but the business units are actually needing to look at this. Like I said, I don't see why this type of technology could not be applied with different types of practices. And I do think that clients want the access and they want the transparency. Okay. And we do the same thing with litigation. Okay. And I talked about the way that we staff it. We always have a shareholder, an associate who's going to be the local trial lead, and then using FlexTime attorneys who know everything, and that's really critical too. They learn everything about the business, and that matters. Our average dedicated FlexTime attorney averages 13 plus years of experience, has a strong EEO background, a lot of prior in-house counsel, a lot of prior partners, shareholders, and some of our star associates. And it's nice because I think that this is something else that law firms should be really thinking about, is what do you do when you have a model that isn't as flexible? Are you really just going to lose that investment? Are you going to let that talent walk out the door? And so to have alternatives, I think, is good for it's good for keeping it in-house, if you will. So this has proven to us to be a good.
Are these guys employees or independent contractors?
No, they're employees. There are attorneys. They're just FlexTime. Yeah, but they're 100% Littler. Yeah. Okay. But speaking of that, what I did want to say, because I think this is also a trend that's impacting our industry. Not every law firm is going to be able to create a FlexTime program, perhaps. But I think that we really need to think about, not only are we living in a global on-demand economy, but we are also dealing with the fact that a lot of attorneys are going to want those options. A lot of employees out there are going to want those options, and that's happening more with this generation of millennials than we've ever seen before, and it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense, I think. So we are definitely seeing that this is a growing trend. By the time we hit 2020, I think easily a third of the workforce, maybe more, is going to be a contingent workforce.
What's the definition of workforce in that private selection? I mean, that's not Littler, is that law, or is that?
Oh, that's I'm sorry, that's not, that is everything. But I guess the reason why I raise this issue is because I don't think our industry is immune from this phenomenon. In fact, we see it happening all the time, right, with the axiom and paradigm type models that are really letting attorneys work when they want to work. And I think we'll be seeing more of that. I just wanted to say I don't think we're immune to that. Okay. Yeah, this was another prediction. So they really think that over 40% or more than 60 million workers will be contingent workers by 2020. Okay, and this is what the millennials are saying. 70% expect to spend part of their career working independently. Okay. And we see this, of course, with Elance and Odesk, the number of workers that are out there. Okay. So where we are today, and I'm going to actually quickly fast forward. The workforce of today is so different than what we're going to see in the next 10 years. And I think people still think about change in a linear fashion, and it's going to catch us in such a powerful way. And hopefully just remembering that 10 years ago we didn't have iPhones triggers something in all of us, because it's an exponential curve at this point. There's nothing linear about what is happening, and it's because of this combination of cognitive computing and the technologies and these pervasive, these ubiquitous computers, right? Embedding computers in everything now, in the refrigerators, what have you, and then the explosion of big data. And it's all about what happens when you combine big data with it and then apply artificial intelligence. These changes are going to be extraordinary. And for those of you who haven't read the Oxford Martin study that came out earlier this year, I do believe that the prediction is true, that with a very high degree of probability, 47% of jobs in the American workforce today will be replaced by some form of whether it's telepresence or telemanipulation. Have you guys seen the Oshbot? I'm sorry?
Oh yes, the Oshbot.
The Oshbot. Have you seen it? Okay. Have you?
It's a little sarcastic or not.
No, it's a television on a pedestal that you can go to at Osh and say, where do I find a reverse engineered wing nut?
Yes.
Blah blah blah. It says, oh, follow me, and it pivots and it rolls, and it'll take you.
And if you say to it, ¿Dónde puedo encontrar?
Reverse engineered wing nut.
Yeah, exactly. Then it will speak to you in Spanish. And if you say, necesito hablar con un experto, I need to speak with an expert, then up will pop a Spanish-speaking person on the screen who will say, let's discuss what seems to be, and that person could be sitting anywhere in the world. Anyways, when you look at the technologies that are out there, 47%, and that's in 10 years, in less than 10 years at this point. Okay, so and just to think about it, 5 years. Uber's only been here 5 years, and now it's a household name in over 55 countries. So think of that as well. Yes?
Quick question on the, and I don't know if I'm jumping in, but earlier you were describing the LitLar system, LitLar GPS, LitLar Case View, I don't
Case Smart. I'm sorry. Yeah, Case Smart. Mm-hmm.
Are those, is that software that LitLar developed?
Oh, yes.
And is that an independent business affiliated with it, or is it a service provided to LitLar's clients?
It's a service provided to our clients. So we
as a separate subscription fee.
GPS is a subscription, so it's an annual subscription. It depends what you want, but I think it's never more than $10,000 a year, and that will notify you of any recent change. Like I said, give you the links that you need, and then we'll also give you access to, I think there are maybe over 50 state surveys. And so you just click on the states where you want to see what's happening, and it answers a whole host of, you can do this, you can do that.
And the reason I'm asking these specific questions is because it sounds almost as though those are items that Littler could spin off into services to other firms. And I'm just like wondering, I'm
Yeah.
interested in hearing, it almost sounds as though that could be an independent subscription service for.
Well, that's already happened. So we developed, I mean, I'll give you an example of, because you're absolutely correct, and that does happen. So Navex is the world's largest legal online training solution. We developed what then became Navex ELT, which is electronic learning training. I may have just gotten that completely wrong, which is embarrassing because I remember as a summer associate working on the development of ELT, but it was online training and huge. I mean, just became huge, and the firm did eventually put that out there into the world for everyone. There is something else that we've recently developed, which is independent contractor classification, which has become a big deal, especially with how many people want to be in the contingent workforce. And so it's customized, links up with your company, so with your recruiting, with your human resources, and you have to answer a series of questions about the applicant. And then along the way, if you have questions about what does this mean, what does that mean, it will tell you. And then you're going to get a degree of risk meter, and can give you then links to how to reduce the risk. And it gives human resources a way to sort of stop this problem of sometimes business units just saying, I don't have the head count, but I need somebody. Poop, okay, independent contractor. And then because it is linked to your hiring systems, it can generate for you the independent contractor agreement or the hiring agreement, whatever it's going to be. So that's another. There's a few examples out there. So big data. I guess what I want to say is that this is like gold to any corporation. It will do for the global economy what electricity did for the global economy. And the reason why I bring this up is that I actually think that some of what we see in the way of more and more corporations using HR predictive analytics, and there's now programs out there that can let you know 1 year before it happens who's going to walk out the door, right? Because it's looking at their networking activity at the meetings, which non-required meetings are they attending, things like that. I mean, it's crazy what can be done. And also, big data analytics are looked at to find the best programmers out there, for example. So for both hiring needs, retention needs, efficiencies, looking at why are we spending so much time and money on this once-a-year meeting that isn't really generating the right results. So it could be that the legal industry starts using HR predictive analytics for their attorneys. And there's certainly programs out there, there's systems out there that are looking at the lawyers to predict what is the likelihood that they will win in this jurisdiction. So I think that's going to have a lot of challenges and flaws, but do you think people won't go for that if they think that they have a chance, that there's a program that's going to tell them, hey, you're probably going to do better, have a better chance with this attorney before this judge in this jurisdiction? So a lot of companies really capitalizing on big revenue, and this is just an example of some of them. Okay. I'm happy to share this, by the way, with anyone who's interested, because I'm not going to go through all of it. Okay, and I think I'm going to skip this as well. These are other tools. I think you have to, for your billing, come up with a good solution for transparency's sake, for budgeting, etc. Data, okay. We don't have to. All right, maybe it's, since we only have 50 minutes. Oh, no, the one thing I want to leave you with is the future. I got to leave you with the future. Okay, so What about 20 years from now? We think of ourselves as having this, that we're this global internet, right? And people are connected. Only 1/3 of the planet is connected. So Google, is tackling this. And it predicts, it's going to launch in the next couple of years, but by putting these balloons up into beyond the stratosphere and working with cellular providers to get the world connected. So it is very likely that most everyone in the world is going to, and technology, guess what? It leads to advancements. We've seen that. We've seen you have organizations that have dropped off laptops without any instruction. The solar-powered laptops. Thank you. I keep doing that, don't I?
It's going to land on me.
Robot can do that.
And the kids, the 5-year-olds will figure it out without any instruction whatsoever. So imagine what that could do for greater equality and advancements. So Google is working on that. And then having things like, the Internet of Things, reaching singularity. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of people that think that is going to happen. I mean, Bill Gates and Stephen Hawking, and I'm trying to think, Elon Tusk. And I think, I'm sorry? Oh, yeah. I think that there's something to that, because the computers will be capable of taking all that big data and applying the analytics. So really having those ready answers, computing, like I said, being ubiquitous, being pervasive, being everywhere, embedded in everything, which it's already happening in a big way. Augmented reality, just taking what is our reality and enhancing it, as opposed to virtual reality, which is an alternate reality. I think that there will be a lot more voice. Look at the movies, look at the sci-fi movies that we watched, even when we were kids. And so think of the Star Trek, like bring me my car, right? And your driverless car is just going to show up. So, okay. So how will that impact the practice of the law? I think courts, despite the fact that some still do use word perfect, are going to have to increase the efficiencies, use more technology. We're certainly going to see leaner. We are already, I think, at 4 attorneys to 1 secretary, and it's entirely doable. It's not like there's 4 times the work. It's just that the attorneys who are coming up in the industry, they're able to do more things on their own using technology. Also having, we have a separate dedicated e-discovery team so that there's no room for error anymore, and there's too much information that's out there. So we have a separate dedicated Littler e-discovery. I think free address offices, and I think a much greater tolerance for attorneys who don't show up to the office every day, letting you show up when you need to show up, right? So why does everybody need to have an office? Going free addresses, the 24/7. I want to know the answer now, and maybe as much as just speaking into your watch and saying, okay, so I'm here in Wisconsin, and the DOL has showed up, and they're saying that they are allowed access. Is that correct? And getting an answer, not having to wait and dial up or email. I don't even think we'll really have email anymore. And billable hours, I think it's going to be very commoditized. What is it going to cost? How quickly can it be done? The billable hour will be dead, I think, in the next 20 years. Okay, that's it. Okay, thank you. We do have time for questions. Yeah.
What percentage of Littler's workforce is part of that flex contingent? Roughly.
Boy, it's growing. I wouldn't. It could be 10%, which is not an insignificant number. Yeah.
Mundane question, who does all the data entry for all those tools that are proprietary for you guys? Is that something your own staff is constantly entering information to keep those tools current?
Oh, it happens. It just happens. The programming, yeah. So once the client, it's a shared dashboard, right? So the client's going to be uploading information.
What the client is putting in, like your chart of charges nationwide for Walmart, for example.
Yeah.
Depends on each location or each business unit entering the data as it comes in.
No, I think that this is just a random attorney in the room. There are ways of drafting programs or writing programs that aggregate information so they can. If you're talking about how does the input get put in for the 50 state legislative changes, is that what you're saying?
Well, that's another good example. I mean, is it tied into Walmart BNA, or is it tied into something? It seems like there's a lot of.
I mean, it's almost like you remember on Wall Street, and you see it in some of the old movies, and the stockbrokers, they would get in early and they would just start flipping through reports, right? And like what's happening with that? I mean, now, boy, there are so many tools out there that just allow you to have that information. So for the updates, it is just a series of legislative monitoring alerts that are used, and then the dedicated, so these knowledge management attorneys, they don't practice law, right? They're not in the courtroom. All they're doing is, okay, like the stockbrokers, okay, here's what happened today. All right, let's get on it. We got to write the summary, a useful summary for the client. We need to send out the alert. We need to link it to the bill, try and get our head around it, and then that gets pushed out. So yeah, there is that sort of creation and entry, but a lot of it is our e-discovery team is involved, and so they're going to, rather than relying on the client oftentimes to give us the information. I mean, we'll partner with IT, we'll partner with whoever we need to, because so much of it's all online at this point, I think.
Do you think these changes will affect the tenure of legal careers?
The tenure of legal careers. I don't know about the tenure of legal careers. I think there's going to be a whole lot less lawyers in the future, because I think that you are going to need to really bring some value. You're going to need to be a subject matter expert in a particular industry and have fierce litigation skills or fierce negotiation skills. I don't know how many of you have heard of Ross, which is IBM's Watson. So Watson is now just in I think 5 years, maybe I'm a little bit off, has managed to get to 95% of accuracy in diagnosis for cancer patients, whereas your top oncologists maybe are getting to 78%, right? In the next 5 years, Watson will be at 99.9% accuracy. And so I think we have to worry about that. We have to think about that. If there is an artificial intelligence system that is going to be able to do what a human mind can't possibly do by filtering through all the information and coming up with what is likely going to be the best solution, it's something that we need to deal with. So I think fewer. Good news is I think lawyers will be able to charge more because they'll bring the something that I think a lot of our legal industry will be commoditized because of technology.
Let me jump in here and try to shake things up a little bit in response to your question, because whereas I don't disagree with anything that's being said here, your question itself has assumptions in it that I think are also part of the question, which is when you say the tenure of an attorney, well, what's an attorney of the future? And one of the trends is that attorneys today are doing a lot more things than a strict attorney did 10 years ago. That they're involved in non-attorney specific delivery of legal services because they're operating in sort of quasi-legal fields, or the legal services is part of the service, which is a little bit more like my practice. And so I think the definition of how people with a legal education earn a living may shift. But it may be that with the access of information and online learning and stuff, there may actually be more attorneys. More people may have legal training. I think California currently has 250,000 licensed attorneys. Maybe there will be more, or maybe there will be more with JDs that don't bother to get a license. But the definition of what it means to practice law is also changing. It's also part of the definition. You know, there's a lot of discussion here about technology, but I read an interesting fact the other day. It took Edison 20 years to admit that the killer app for the phonograph was playing music. He didn't accept the fact that his invention would be used for something so base and trivial. And so I made the comment earlier that without an understanding of where it is you're trying to go, and it's actually the actual history of innovation is based on this premise, most technologies that become like important innovations take years to find the application that is actually accepted by the market and actually becomes the killer app. And when you look at inventions like, you know, an iPad, for example, the origins of that invention actually go back many, many years. The problem is that the convergence of market forces and other things occurred at a moment that allowed it to become a killer application. And if that's true about iPads and so forth, then isn't it also true about the practice of law as an enterprise? That our definition of how we do that and why we do it and who pays for it and what combination of skills and services become part of an attorney's livelihood, all of that is open to speculation as well. And my point is that we could take the last time that we were together, we had an interesting guy from the artificial intelligence professor at Stanford on artificial intelligence. His prediction was that AI would eliminate attorneys entirely. And so we had this heated discussion about that.
Judges too.
Huh?
Judges too.
Yeah, and judges and juries, and why not? Just go, am I guilty or not? I think you're guilty. Okay, fine. You know?
Yeah.
So there's that side. It's very attractive. But the other side of it is, do we always want to just follow wherever the technology leads us? As new capabilities become available to us, do we just want to adopt them and follow them wherever they go because we have capabilities? I look at a firm like yours, and the way I look at that is that we have a client base, somebody like Walmart, and you have a practice area which is employment law, and you think about the enormous problem that Walmart has to deal with the just the sheer numbers, the big data of employment litigation when you're a company that employs that many people.
You're the largest employer in the world.
Yeah, there you go. So a firm like this, and one of the things that's nice is kind of like Lena Horne's statement, you know, I've been rich and I've been poor, and rich is better. Large enterprises are better in one regard, and that is that they have the ability to deploy large amounts of resources to solutions and develop these sort of complex, sophisticated responses to a very complex, large market need. And a small solo firm is not going to be able to satisfy Walmart's legal needs. So that's a marriage made in heaven, and technology in that context makes a lot of sense, and so forth.
But I will say, so take your company that only has 15 employees, and they have a real question about if they can bring someone on as an independent contractor, because they don't want to risk that then they're going to be liable for all the benefits, the taxes that should have been paid, and all the penalties associated, and it matters that much to them. So it's messy and complicated to go through this analysis of who constitutes an independent contractor and all that, and maybe you get it wrong, but using.
Remember this? Hi, this is Rob. Can I help you? I mean, that's one possible solution.
No. But I'm saying I'm saying if there is a tool.
Yeah.
Where it will be ding, 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 based on everything that we know that's out there in the world, and then it's going to tell you, and you don't even need to talk to a lawyer. And guess what? If you got that analysis done, the DOL, which was created, by the way, by former DOL leaders who now work with us, then you're gonna have, I think, that you're giving that small business an opportunity to do something without needing to talk to a lawyer, and I think that we're going to be seeing more of that. I think companies will expect more of it.
Okay, so where am I coming from? I don't look for a technological solution that is designed to eliminate the need for lawyers. That's not my design goal. My goal is to provide the information that is needed when it's needed to the person that needs the information. And one way to do that is if I have a personal relationship with a small business owner and they have such a question, they may just pick up the phone and talk to me for 5 minutes and get their answer. That's another model. There's nothing wrong with that model. It's just operating at a different scale. It's operating on a more of a relationship, local level. And I'm not going to be called by somebody in New York, but I'm likely to be called by somebody in the financial district. And so that's a viable model. Now, in terms of what tools I have available for me to be able to answer that question effectively as a solo practitioner, that's another technological question. But I'm playing devil's advocate here, just to make it try to have a discussion. But there is another point of view. We don't have to, big data applies to big enterprises that are trying to make specific decisions about huge amounts of data and to try to connect huge amounts of data into some operational decision at an individual level. Politics is turning that way, where the big data of politics is trying to target particular individual voters that they want to get to the polls. I mean, that's an application.
Yeah, I guess to end the point. The millennials, they're the first digital native generation, and they are going to be the majority of the workforce in just a few years here, and they've grown up texting as opposed to picking up the phone, and they want their dinner now, and then it's just there. And so I think that we can't hide from the fact that we can't assume that our industry is going to be immune to that. I think there's some other areas where I think you have to have.
I would never argue that we're immune to anything, to any of the forces. And in fact, we're all affected by millennials in all kinds of ways, that some of them we like and some of them we don't like. And so my role as a human being is to push back on the things that I don't like and to adopt the things that I do like and to configure my world in a way that suits me. And I think that applies to each of us individually, but it also applies to our clients.
Yeah. Okay, we'll take one more comment and then wrap it up so we can get everyone out on time.
I think that what I'm hearing, though, is that our market, our customers, our clients, their way of interacting and getting their answers and needs responded to are changing, and they will be more demanding, and they will want their legal advice to be delivered when they need it, and they'll have a short attention span. And so while we as attorneys might wish to clock out at a certain time of day and no longer take calls, what we're going to have is more frustrated clients, right, who expect a technological answer or expect a promptness. And frankly, I have no boundaries. My clients call me whenever they want, and I have to answer them at
Does it work out? Yeah, okay. So, one of the other panelists on this prior thing that we did together was Quick Legal, and their business model was exactly that. It was, you're on call as an attorney. It doesn't matter where you are, and this platform connects up clients that have a question with attorneys who are willing to answer them, and they bill for that. And so it's another way of providing the solution that you're looking for, which is, I have a question I want an answer now. Here's how I'm going to interface with whoever is going to provide me that answer. And there's more than one approach to that. And it just depends on who the client is, what their needs are, who the attorney is, what their needs are. And there's probably a business model in this big world that accommodates a lot of different models. So
this is what we call transition. And this is the second time we've done this, and we've had the same level of debate both times, which is really good and very, very healthy. Please join me in thanking Natalie and Rob.
Pleasure.